The convention hall was filled with hundreds of young veterans, men and women who had faced the unthinkable on the battlefield. Some wore their service jackets, others sat in quiet contemplation, their eyes carrying the weight of memories too heavy to share. Despite the camaraderie of the gathering, a common undercurrent ran through the crowd: disillusionment, skepticism, and an unspoken question. Where was God when the bullets were flying and the world burned around them? If you had witnessed suffering beyond words, would you still believe in the existence of a higher power? If everything you had known about faith had been shattered by war, what could possibly restore it? For most in the room, faith was a distant memory, something they once held as children but had long since abandoned. After all, how could any God allow the horrors they had seen? But amidst the murmurs and discussions, a name echoed over the loudspeaker: CLINT Eastwood. If you enjoy content that helps you grow spiritually, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join our community for more inspiration. Let's get started. The room fell into a hushed anticipation. Most expected a speech about resilience, about pushing forward despite life's hardships. What they did not expect was what happened next. Eastwood entered the stage without fanfare, his presence alone commanding the attention of the entire hall. He took slow, deliberate steps to the center, eyes scanning the faces of the men and women before him. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence was thick, almost challenging. Then, in one smooth motion, he reached into the pocket of his worn leather jacket and pulled out a small, aged Bible. The reaction was immediate. Low chuckles, scoffs, and disbelieving murmurs rippled through the audience. One veteran in the front row leaned back, shaking his head. "Here we go," he muttered under his breath. Another, arms crossed, smirked at his friend. A voice from the back called out, half mocking, half genuine, "Seriously, Clint? After everything we've seen?" Eastwood didn't flinch. He didn't smirk. He simply held the Bible loosely in one hand and let the weight of the moment settle. The room was tense, charged with the unspoken resentment that so many of these men and women carried inside them. And then, with his signature gravelly tone, he finally spoke. "I've seen things most men wouldn't believe," he said, his voice cutting through the air like steel. "And I can tell you this, war doesn't prove God isn't there. It just proves how much we need him." The laughter faded, the murmurs quieted, and for the first time in a long time, some of these hardened souls found themselves listening. He wasn't trying to convince anyone, he wasn't a preacher, and he sure as hell wasn't the type to beg for attention. Yet there he stood, holding that small, worn Bible, its leather cover creased from time and use. The skeptical glances from the veterans before him didn't faze him. If anything, they only reinforced what he already knew. These weren't people looking for easy answers. They were people who had seen too much. At some point, we all reach a moment where everything we thought we understood is shaken. When the weight of our experiences leaves us questioning, searching, hoping that something out there can make sense of it all. Maybe that moment is now. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign, for something greater to guide you forward. This is exactly what The Secret of Jesus' Apparitions offers, a path to clarity and peace through his revelations. This ebook goes into his prophecies and offers insight into what lies ahead. It's available for free in the pinned comment. Grab it now before the edition's gone. One man in the front row scoffed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "All right, old man," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're really telling us that after everything we've been through, after what we saw over there, that this," he motioned toward the Bible, "still means something?" Eastwood let out a slow breath, his weathered face unreadable. He tilted his head slightly, studying the soldier who had spoken. "You ever seen a man survive something he shouldn't have?" His voice was low, but carried across the room like a bullet hitting steel. A bullet misses by an inch. A landmine doesn't go off when it should. Someone walks out of a wreckage without a scratch when they should be 6 feet under. A murmur ran through the audience. Several veterans shifted in their seats, their expressions tightening. They had seen things like that. They had been there when the impossible happened. Eastwood nodded slowly, reading their reactions. "You tell yourselves it was luck," he continued. "You tell yourselves it was coincidence, but deep down, you know damn well there's something more. You just don't want to call it what it is." The soldier who had spoken didn't have an immediate comeback. He looked away, jaw clenched, like a man wrestling with something he didn't want to face. A gust of wind rattled the windows of the convention hall, the sudden force making some turn their heads instinctively. The banners hanging along the walls trembled, though the room itself had been sealed tight against the cold. Eastwood didn't flinch. He simply opened the Bible in his hands, running his rough fingers over the thin pages, and without looking up, he spoke again. "There's something bigger than us. Whether you accept it or not, that's up to you. But I've been around long enough to know, you don't walk through hell and back without someone watching over you." The murmurs had stopped now. No one was laughing anymore, because for the first time, they weren't just hearing him, they were feeling it. The wind had rattled the windows just moments ago, but now the air inside felt heavier, not oppressive, but charged with something unspoken, something neither seen nor explained. Some of the veterans sat motionless, eyes fixed on Eastwood, while others glanced at each other, searching for an answer they couldn't quite articulate. Then, from the back of the room, a gruff voice cut through the silence. "I prayed once," a man said, his voice rough, burdened with years of anger. "Over there, when we were surrounded, I prayed like hell." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Didn't make a damn difference. A few heads nodded. Some of these men had done the same, whispered desperate prayers into the dirt, into the cold, into the deafening chaos of war. And yet, for many of them, the heavens had remained silent. Eastwood slowly closed the Bible in his hands, tapping his fingers against the worn cover. He didn't respond right away. He let the weight of the soldier's words settle before speaking. "You ever read the book of Job?" he asked, his voice steady. "Man loses everything, his home, his family, his health. Sits there in the dust, asking God why. Wants an answer, wants justice." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the men who had lost brothers, friends, pieces of themselves in war. But instead of giving him a straight answer, God asks him a question. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" If this moment is stirring something in you, don't ignore it. A proper understanding awaits. Your free ebook is still available, but not for long. Check the pinned comment. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Some of the veterans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others furrowed their brows, as if trying to push away something stirring inside them. Eastwood ran a hand over his jaw. "We think we got it all figured out," he said. "We think we understand what's fair, what's right, what God should and shouldn't do. But we're just men. And when you're in the middle of the fight, you don't always see the whole damn battlefield." A shudder ran through the room, though no one could say why. The windows vibrated again, but there was no wind outside now. The banners along the stage swayed gently, as if touched by an unseen force. One of the younger soldiers near the front took in a shaky breath. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, his eyes flickered with something unfamiliar. Not surrender, but the first spark of something else entirely. Some of the veterans stared at Eastwood, others at the Bible still resting in his hands. The air inside the hall carried something unspoken, something that neither logic nor experience could fully explain. A powerful breath was heard. One of the men sitting near the front, a soldier no older than 30, clenched his fists. His jaw tightened as he exhaled slowly, trying to contain whatever war had left inside him. "So that's it?" he finally said, his voice laced with frustration. "We just have to accept that we don't get answers." His question hit hard. Many of the men in that room had been asking the same thing since they returned home. Eastwood's expression remained unreadable. He set the Bible down on a small table beside him, his fingers lingering on its worn leather cover. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady. "No," he said. "You don't just accept it. You live it." The soldier scoffed, shaking his head. "What the hell does that even mean?" Eastwood let out a slow breath. "Means you don't quit on the truth just because it ain't easy to understand." His gaze moved over the crowd. "You ever think that maybe faith ain't about getting every answer, but about learning how to stand even when you don't have one?" He lifted the Bible again, opening it carefully before reading, his gravelly voice carrying across the hall. "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom." Isaiah 40:28. He let the words settle before closing the book again. The soldier who had spoken crossed his arms, but his eyes betrayed him. They were searching now, less guarded, less certain of their disbelief. Then something shifted. A metallic clang echoed from the far end of the room. The crowd turned instinctively toward the sound, their expressions hardening as old instincts kicked in. But nothing had fallen. Sometimes the right words at the right time can change everything. Grab your free ebook now, while copies last. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. The room was still. The banners above the stage swayed again, though no draft had moved through the hall. Someone whispered something under their breath, a prayer, or maybe a realization. Eastwood didn't flinch. He simply sat back, letting the weight of the moment press itself onto those who were ready to face it. The metallic clang still echoed faintly in the minds of those present, though no one could explain its source. The convention hall had grown eerily still, as if the very air had thickened, pressing down on the shoulders of the veterans inside. Some shifted uneasily in their seats, their minds battling between logic and something bigger, something unexplainable. Then, without warning, the overhead lights flickered once, twice. A murmur ran through the crowd. The banners above the stage swayed again, not with the rhythm of an indoor draft, but as if something unseen had brushed against them. A few men instinctively glanced toward the exits, their military training making them hyper-aware of any change in their environment. Eastwood remained still. His hand rested lightly on the Bible beside him, his fingers barely grazing the surface of its leather cover. He wasn't startled. If anything, he looked as if he'd seen this before. A veteran near the back swallowed hard and ran a hand over his face. This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "None of this makes any damn sense." Another man, one who had been laughing at the start of the event, leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at Eastwood with something between disbelief and desperation. "What the hell is happening?" The older man exhaled slowly before speaking. "You tell me," he said, his voice calm steady as ever. You all spend your time saying if God was real, he'd show up. So maybe the real question is, what do you do when he does? The lights above flickered once more, and then they dimmed. A hush spread through the crowd. The hall had a chill, but it wasn't from the cold air. It was from something greater, something that got into your bones. The tension was thick, suffocating. Then, just as suddenly, a single beam of light broke through the high windows of the convention center. It wasn't artificial. It wasn't from the flickering lights. It was coming from outside, directly above. The beam struck the stage, illuminating Eastwood in a way that left no room for coincidence. The men who had been hardened by war, who had witnessed destruction beyond comprehension, who had abandoned belief in anything beyond what they could see and touch, they were now staring at something they could not explain. A few men shifted in their seats. A young soldier, barely out of his 20s, exhaled sharply. He had seen explosions light up the night sky, but this was different. Then Eastwood spoke again, his tone unshaken, unwavering. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. John 20:29. Feeling something you can't quite explain? That's not coincidence. Your free ebook is waiting, offering clarity and strength when you need it most. Don't miss out. Check the pinned comment. The hall remained frozen in an unnatural stillness. The single beam of light piercing through the high windows bathed Eastwood in an unshakable glow, its source from above, unwavering, steady, undeniable. No one spoke, no one dared to. A veteran near the middle of the room gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His lips parted, but no words came. He had faced enemy fire, watched the impossible unfold in war. But this was something else entirely. A sudden, sharp breath broke the silence. The young soldier from the front row, the same one who had questioned everything, lowered his head into his hands. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, his body trembling under the weight of something unseen. His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do with this. Eastwood's gaze locked onto him, steady as ever. Nobody ever does, he said plainly, his tone carrying the weight of decades. Not at first. The young man wiped at his face, his jaw clenched tight as he fought emotions he had long buried. His breathing was ragged, uneven. Then he fell to his knees. A ripple ran through the room. One by one, other men followed. Not out of force, not out of expectation, but because something deep inside them had shifted, something they couldn't fight anymore. If this message makes you think and you feel it connects with you, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Also, if you really want to support our work and help us keep creating valuable content, consider giving us a super thanks. Join this amazing community and don't miss any news. A veteran in the back exhaled sharply, closing his eyes, his hands gripping the tags hanging from his neck. Another ran a shaking hand through his hair, looking at the floor as though he had just come face to face with a reality he had spent years trying to escape. And then Eastwood opened the Bible again, his movements slow, deliberate. The weight of the book in his hands felt heavier now, not as a burden, but as a foundation. His voice was calm when he read, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. A choked sob echoed somewhere in the crowd. No one moved to leave. No one questioned what had just happened. The reality of it hung in the air, pressing into their souls in ways no battlefield, no war, no moment of survival ever had. Something had changed, and there was no going back.